Alzheimer's disease is certainly having a growing impact on New Jersey families. Dr. Michal Schneider, Dr. Michal Schnaider Beeri is the director of the Rutgers, Krieger, Klein Alzheimer's Research Center and the Brain Health Institute. Dr. Schnaider Beeri leads the first and only Alzheimer's Research Center in New Jersey and is spearheading a new physician scientist program. We say good morning to you, Doctor. First off, good to have you on.
Good morning.
You bet. So first, let me say I have a father with advanced dementia who's 95. God bless him. But is it me or are the cases of Alzheimer's increasing exponentially, or is it just being diagnosed more?
So it's a little bit of both, but the main issue is that medicine is getting better, and the better medicine, the longer we live. And Alzheimer's disease is a disease of aging, which means that the age of 65 to 70, you'll see between 2 and 5% of Alzheimer's patients in the population. And after the age of 85, it's actually 50%. So at the age of 95, it's essentially almost a sure diagnosis, as unfortunate as it sounds.
It is amazing, and it's amazing to watch the progress. I guess I'm blessed because it's a gradual progress, very slow, but I know for some people it's very fast, right? It depends on the individual.
That is true. The later the disease, the less genetic it is, and in some ways a little less aggressive. The earlier it happens, the more aggressive it is. So in that way, you gained your dad better or in a better shape despite his dementia at very old age.
Yeah, in fact, that's exactly, obviously, because you know what you're talking about, it's exactly what happened. He was into his, I guess, early to mid 80s before we started to notice anything. And then it just started gradually, and he was driving until he was 92 years old. So that tells you, so from 92 to 95 is when we saw the progression. That's why I guess it's so slow, right? It's because it started so late. But I have friends whose parents started in their 60s and 70s, and by their 80s, they passed and they were bad. So it's amazing to see how different it is in all the different folks. And there are currently, I know in New Jersey, about 220,000 residents with Alzheimer's. Is that number apart, by the way, from other dementias, or are all the dementias kind of in that number, doctor?
So it is a number for dementia, and so often dementia is diagnosed as Alzheimer's disease simply because under the umbrella of all dementias, the greatest prevalence is of Alzheimer's disease pathology, which is what defines Alzheimer's disease. So about 70% of the dementias is due to Alzheimer's disease, so people get confused, but it's all the dementias. And I do want to emphasize that it's 220,000 that have been diagnosed. We don't know how many have not been diagnosed. And this does not account for everyone who has mild cognitive impairment, where people, the vast majority of whom will develop dementia. Okay, it's kind of a very early stage of dementia. And there is a hundreds of thousands in the state and millions in the country that have high risk due to their genetics and mainly due to their environmental exposures that may contribute to the risk of developing the disease. So it's really an epidemic, from my point of view, a disaster, and by all means, the greatest fire in trying to find solutions for this disease from a professional point of view.
And Dr. Schneider Beery, I just recently read a study, and I'm sure you read a study a day at least, and I believe this was from Australia, talking about a link to the energy producing parts of the neurological cells in the brain that seem not to be firing correctly. And that that in rats they were testing and they figured out a way to reverse that and get the mitochondria of the cells in the brain to start firing again, and that they were able to produce a limited reversal of Alzheimer's or the equivalent of Alzheimer's in mice and rats. I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure you read a study, if not a dozen studies a day. But do you feel that at some point in the future we will understand the disease more and possibly be able to treat it better?
So, I'm actually, if we had this conversation 3 or 4 years ago, I would be less optimistic. But
Mhm.
because new medications have been approved and they address a particular pathology that defines Alzheimer's disease, right? They address amyloid. And that kind of opened the field to a whole new discussion about other pathologies, about other factors that affect the disease, such as metabolism in the brain. And I think, or I believe more than think, that we're actually moving faster and more effectively because of our great fails and because a few were approved and their effects are relatively limited, but they have some effect. So this is a great motivator for us.
Fascinating. I would imagine because of for those that don't realize, I only know because my mother had a hemorrhagic stroke about 10 years ago. They detected that she had amyloid plaques in her brain, and so because of that, I started doing a lot of research about amyloid plaques and how the impact that it would have on stroke and Alzheimer's, et cetera. Clearly, I'm just an amateur doing a little reading, but so the idea here is these drugs help break the amyloid plaques up so that allows what? That allows better blood flow into the recesses of the brain. Is that what that would do?
It actually, the plaques themselves, they sit between the neurons, right? So the neurons don't touch each other in that little space that is called synapse. The plaques aggregate there, all right? They also tend to aggregate on vessels, which might have been the case of your mom. Yeah, but most generally speaking, they block the communication between the brain cells and cause a cascade of brain death, of cell death. So what those drugs are doing is actually clearing and breaking down these amyloid plaques, supposedly preventing additional cell death. The Let's say the grain of salt behind all that is that those new drugs are very, very effective in clearing those amyloid plaques, but but their effect on cognition are relatively mild.
Doctor, I
So
have to cut you off right there only because we're up against a hard commercial. We have to have you back. I could talk to you for an
sure,
hour. Dr. Michal
absolutely.
Schnaider Beeri, director of the Rutgers Krieger Klein Alzheimer's Research Center and the Brain Health Institute. Brilliant. Thank you for coming on this morning.